Today's episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show is brought to you by Deadly Grounds Coffee. It's the #1 choice of horror fans worldwide. Nothing starts your day or night better than a delicious cup of Deadly Grounds. Whether you're hunting ghosts or fighting the next zombie apocalypse, any one of Deadly's 30-plus roasts will bring you to caffeine nirvana with the richest flavor you've ever had. Whether you're craving their Hellhound Roast, Witch's Brew, Devil's Night Roast, or Sinful Delight, order online at getdeadly.com for easy and safe shipping right to your door. We know that once you go deadly, you won't go back. Join the deadly revolution today. Be bold, be different, be deadly. Deadly Grounds Coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. Get some at getdeadly.com. Welcome back to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. JD Lifshitz and Raphael Margules are the founders and executives of BoulderLight Pictures, a horror-centric production house in Los Angeles. Under BoulderLight, JD and Rafi have put out over 15 movies, including Becky, Pledge, Contracted, Dementia, and most recently, The Vigil. When asked who is the next Blumhouse, Jason Blum, without question, said BoulderLight Pictures. Between their shrewd emphasis on economics, their eye for bold talent, and their recently launched international sales arm, JD and Rafi are forces to be reckoned with. And it seems like they're just getting started. In this interview, we talked about their filmography, the launch of BoulderLight, and strategies for aspiring producers on this very special episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Now, without further ado, here are JD Lifshitz and Raphael Margules of BoulderLight Pictures. All right, Rafi and JD of BoulderLight Pictures. How are you guys doing?
Great, thank God. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. I, big admirer of your movies and everything you guys have built as a company. And I guess to start us off, I feel like something that's very topically relevant right now is how filmmakers are dealing in the age of COVID. I mean, as the vaccine is rolling through, things are opening up a little bit more. But it seems like you guys have weathered the COVID storm relatively well. So I'm curious as to what it's been like for you guys to make movies and release movies in the era of COVID. And also, what do you think the immediate future holds for filmmakers?
Well, Rafi, do you want to go or should I? Okay. Well, thank God we were very fortunate. We had a really great 2019 where we had just a busy year. And 2020 we saw the release of 4 movies essentially, all in different ways. Our film The Vigil had a pretty broad theatrical release internationally. And Becky, which is our action film, actually made a pretty incredible amount of money just playing drive-ins. We were covered by the Wall Street Journal and by Forbes. And that was something that was just a really happy accident of the pandemic. I mean, I'd say it made more money than it probably would have in traditional theaters because of the drive-in situation. Yes, us and The Wretched and Relic and The Rental were a couple of movies that really benefited from that, from that experience. And I think we had the highest per theater average of the summer.
Wow.
Besides maybe maybe the Russell Crowe movie Unhinged beat us. I don't remember that. If that beat us, but besides that, I think we have and maybe Tenet. Obviously, I don't know if Tenet technically came out at the tail end of the summer. But in fact, Forbes ran an article that if Unhinged and Tenet keep pushing, then Becky and The Wretched will be the only 2 hits of the summer. But so Becky did really well because of the push. We were upset because we had our movie The Vigil was at South by, and thankfully it wasn't the world premiere. It was just the North American premiere. But that ultimately had to be canceled, and that was a bummer. And Becky was supposed to be at Tribeca, which is a festival I wanted to go to for years. But all things considered, both films had deals when they were supposed to play at those festivals. Mm-hmm. They were more for kind of petty, and not petty, but just like the opportunity to have fun and watch them with an audience,
right?
Than it was about the actual business side of things. So the fact is as much of a bummer as it may feel like in the moment not to get to go to the festivals. Thank God, if you've got your health and a roof over your head and all the essentials, everything else is just gravy. And we were, really grateful that we had so many films come out and really got, the reactions were really quite, awesome. And that really was wonderful. We only did one, if you could call it production, we did reshoots sort of on a film called Wild Indian that we had at Sundance a couple months ago. And that was done during the pandemic. But besides that, we're about to start our first production since the pandemic started, going in May, June time, which, because again, we didn't have anything get shut down, thankfully, but,
we actually had a movie that we can't really speak about what it is yet, but we had a movie that was slated to go in November in California, and we were all ready to go, COVID protocols, the whole thing, fully prepped. And then our lead actress is on a very big show that ended up moving up their schedule. And instead of recasting the role, we decided to push production to summer of this year. So it was interesting to see how a COVID movie was going to come along. We were going to create a COVID bubble in Northern California. So basically, like, a lot of our crew and cast would have come up from LA and San Francisco. And it would have sort of been a camp that you couldn't leave.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely wise.
But it ultimately, no productions got shut down because of COVID. So that was, again, I'm very grateful for that.
That's great. Yeah, that's a really good place to be in. So I'm always fascinated with studios like you guys and with Blumhouse. I'm always fascinated at the overall studio model. And obviously the model by which you make movies probably obviously iterates the more movies that you make. But you guys have been in business for a while, a lot of movies under your belt. Is there kind of a model that you guys abide by? Blumhouse is obviously typically one location and, reliable director, one or two big stars, but they don't do trailer, they don't have the stars and trailers, and they cut costs where they can, and they keep it under budget. Is there any sort of model that you guys attempt to stick to that most of your productions fall into?
It's funny. One of the things that we learned since starting out is that modeling can be dangerous. We do have, obviously, in the sense of like every project, with some exceptions, tends to be sort of informed by the market.
Right.
But ultimately, we look at every project as an island. Unless it's a part of a slate, which is kind of a different story. But we tend to look at every project like an island because you never know what the ceiling will be for the project. So, for example, we have a film that we just set up with a very large studio that we can't mention yet, that is probably being made for, that we didn't think necessarily when we became involved in the project, we'd be making it at the level that we're making it for. But because we didn't box ourselves in, we allowed ourselves the opportunity for that opportunity to happen. Right. So I think that sometimes people come in, it's funny with the Vigil, just to use that as an example, when the script was sent to us, the manager's a dear friend, Antonio Dantino, was like, I have a project that only you guys should do. And normally that means everyone else has passed on it. But in this case, it was a Jewish horror movie. And I read the script and I said, this is pretty good. Is he open to notes? And he was. And we brought in Keith, and he was just a rock star at developing the idea out and fleshing the script out. And basically, their pitch to us was, we could make this movie for $200,000 in Colorado in a cabin. And I remember calling Antonio, I believe, and saying, I don't want to make a $200,000 Fantastic Fest calling card. I say this as a big fan of the Fantastic Fest.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to make a $200,000 Fantastic Fest lineup, Fantastic Fest calling card. I want to make a $700,000 TIFF movie that can go out broadly. And Keith and his manager were like, okay. And so we actually scaled up the script and the movie from what it was. We reset it in Brooklyn, which everyone felt was more authentic. And, and we decided, like, let's spend more money. Again, that's not $700,000 is ultimately not a lot of money, but it's just the idea of that's what that movie needed. That movie needed, that roughly that amount of money to tell the story that we wanted to tell. Because you never want, and obviously even Becky, which was, sub 5 million. But that was a movie that had, a movie star, a television star.
Yeah.
And even this big studio movie where the budget is, many multiples of what we're talking about. Even on that movie, it's a period piece. It's got a huge set and a movie, and also stars. Any movie that we do, we never want it to feel like it's budget. And that's something where. We're going to kill ourselves to make the best thing possible, regardless of the amount of money we have to spend. But you never want to say, I need to spend I will only make, haunted house movies for $2 million because A, you're not really going to make very exciting things that way.
Right.
And B, you're going to kind of box yourself into a prison. And I will say to Jason Blum's credit, we're big Jason Blum fans. And I think one of the things Jason's been so great at is in as much as he confines himself to certain types of models, he will venture out if he sees an opportunity that makes sense. He'll do a Whiplash if he thinks Chazelle is a filmmaker to bet on. He'll do a movie like, even I would say a movie like Get Out. That's a first-time filmmaker. It's a first-time director. Or spending more on a movie like Black Klansman. Again, not technically so much of a Blumhouse movie, but still Jason's involved in that movie. Being able to say, being able to change with the times and be reflexive, I think is more imperative now than it's ever been before, because people are inundated with garbage every Tuesday and Friday. I mean, we have more things coming out, now than I think probably in human history in terms of entertainment options. You need to be working harder than ever to tell stories that people feel like they haven't seen before, and that they can, that feel urgent and necessary. Yeah. We're constantly chasing. I remember as a kid going to Blockbuster and walking through the aisles with my terrified mother, as I would always pick off like Evil Dead 2 or something. There's the movie that I wanted to rent at 8 years old. And how do I create, or looking in Fangoria magazine, and whether it was a movie like Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows, or maybe a slightly sometimes better movie, seeing those images and being like, I can't wait to watch this. This feels amazing. There's that magic that I think that you have to work overtime these days to reestablish that for audiences when they have so many opportunities to watch literally anything but what you're doing.
Yeah, and so obviously we focus on genre movies, that's horror, action, thriller, sci-fi, everything that's under the blanket of genre. Mm-hmm. But every project that we approach is something that we're in love with. Something that just like, there's immediately an angle, a hook, something that we're super excited about, whether that's a supernatural horror movie set in a Hasidic community or Kevin James with a swastika in his head.
Right.
There's always some sort of angle of just like, we've never seen this before. And us too, as genre fans, would be super excited to see this movie. Yeah. And then obviously we're going to be doing it at a very responsible budget.
Yeah. And I will say, I generally say we only want to be getting involved at this point, and that's changed over time. I think that you evolve as a company, and as a person, thank God. But I think that the three things that I try to look at, I only want to get involved in something if it's either a sequel, a big payday, or it's going to be somebody's favorite movie of the year. It's going to be something that we're totally going to get behind. And that's not to say that something can't be all three, but definitely one of those three boxes is what we look to if we're going to get involved in something. So, you have a movie like Wild Indian, which we just had at Sundance, which really doesn't fit into our model. It's more of a drama than anything. It's a first-time feature filmmaker. It's got a great cast. We have Michael Greyeyes and Jesse Eisenberg and Kate Bosworth, but it is, and many others. But but ultimately that was a script where we both read it. And we both said, this is the type of movie that we get excited about. This is the type of filmmaker we get excited about. Let's roll the dice. Let's get involved in this. So it's keeping an open mind and understanding that everything's up to God. Nobody knows what's going to happen. The business is changing constantly, and taste is changing constantly. And so you can never be too stoned. Yeah. But at the same time, having some sort of we're not looking to do Western romance dance movies, right? That's not what we're looking to do. And things have to make financial sense. I always say, I love the movie Foxcatcher, but I don't think we would make Foxcatcher. Right.
Well, I think you touch on something really important, which is making movies that have an urgency to them, because it's a fantastic feeling that harkens me right back to Blockbuster or my local video room, which I used to rent at, where there was that anticipation for a movie. And it's rare. Like Psycho Goreman, I had that since they announced it. I was like, I cannot fucking wait to see that.
I can't wait to tell Peter Kuplowski that he's here for.
But that urgency is really hard to come by. I mean, as you're working on movies at the beginning stage, are there any keys for establishing that urgency for audience members, or is it something that you just you observe whether or not it is in yourself? Like, do you greenlight a movie based on is the level of urgency that movie will have for the both of you?
Yeah, I think it's about finding things that are salacious and highs and lows are important. So just to use Becky as an example, Becky is a very easy it's Die Hard with 12-year-old, right? It's a genre movie that works. It's a trope that works. And then it was about, okay, how do we cast the movie in a way where all of a sudden this thing that's very, very familiar, that we're very used to, we make feel, slightly different in a way that's immediately compelling. And so, putting someone like Kevin James, who's never done a genre movie, certainly never done a movie, as far as I know, that got an NC-17 from the MPA like we did in it. That already, okay, that sets you apart. Making the dad, Joel McHale, sets you apart. A movie like The Vigil, The Vigil is a movie we've seen before, right? We were joking, we were doing James Wan meets Martha. We've seen haunted house movies, we've seen possession movies, we've seen movies, even movies with people in a body, we've seen that. But we haven't seen it done like this, and done in a way where you're implicitly creating imagery that does not exist in the marketplace, and you're tapping into an audience. You're going after audiences that are rabid and at times underserved. So, to use Becky as an example, we know we have the action audience, and we know we have a Kevin James audience. Kevin James, people were, prior to Becky, he'd never starred in a movie that made less than 40 million theatrically. That was not a Netflix movie or something, right? As far as fair, at least not in the past 10 years or whatever. And so you have this actor who's associated with one kind of thing, where we know we'll get a portion of his audience that's hopefully intrigued by that. Right. And you also have this genre movie to fall back on, which has its own audience. Listen, again, it does come down to, you need to feel in yourself, do I feel like there is something in this movie that's speaking to me, as you said, but also just like, what are audiences that we know exist that aren't being serviced as much as they can be serviced. And I would even say, like, you mentioned that great thing about, like, haunted house movies. I used to joke that, like, so many of the horror movies that were coming out were like haunted house movies in the valley, right? And they all felt the same. And I would always wonder, like, there is this great line that you can't lose money on a horror movie. You can lose money on any movie. You can lose money on anything, right? Movies are this commodity that people do not need. Like, nobody, we might love movies, but so many people just don't. I remember Rafi and I would always joke, like, you go to the theater on a Saturday night and you have people pointing at posters being like, what's that? Oh, that's the new scary movie. We should see that. People are, we think as fans, but we have to understand that most people don't necessarily think as fans,
Right.
Doesn't mean that they don't love movies, but their relationship to cinema is fundamentally different. So how do you speak to that audience while also simultaneously speaking to guys like us who read Fangoria and are constantly following the entertainment news and how do you kind of satisfy your core group while not isolating kind of wider audiences that justify getting larger budgets?
And something that I would add on this is something that we've developed and learned over the 9 years that we've been doing this, is we make, at this stage in our careers, we're making projects more or less that we're in love with. We love this. We need to see this. And there was a minute there where we were making movies for what we thought other people might like. And I think that was a really important thing to learn, is that if you're not really in love with the things that you're doing, there's no point in pursuing them, because chances are it won't work and other people won't care either.
Yeah.
And that was Rafi hit the nail on the head. And that was, I really think Becky and the Vigil were turning points for us, where we just decided, like, we're not going to get involved in something unless it fits one of those three buckets. The
other thing is that these days, because we have so many projects now that we're working on, thankfully, is that, like, if we're not super excited about something, it'll just fizzle and die out.
Right.
And just there's no point of wasting time on projects that will just end up being dead ends.
Gotcha. So it is ultimately all about passion and making the movies that you're dying to see and that you're in love with. That's the North Star of the company, it sounds like.
I think that if that's not there, it's going to be difficult for us to move forward. Again, unless it is that sequel or that Payday or whatever it is. Right. But if it's like, let's champion this vision or this original script or whatever it is, and it takes months and months, if not years, to put a project together and get it to a point where it can get made, those projects we're going to have to be in love with. Yeah.
And that's what again, it comes down to, it doesn't take that much less effort to make a bad movie than a good movie. So you might as well make the good movie, and the good movie tends to be more profitable and more important for you. A movie like Vigil, it's 70% or whatever, 50% in Yiddish. It's nobody you've ever heard of in the movie for the most part. Maybe Lynn Cohen, you've read and a lot. But besides that, and even then, you're probably a film fan, right? It's no stars traditionally in the movie. It's a first-time feature filmmaker, and it was immensely profitable. I mean, it was profitable out of kit, essentially. And that was, that's our highest-grossing movie worldwide. And so again, quality matters. Audiences, if you make a really scary movie or a really good movie, that it's very rare, very, very rare that I see that not rewarded by the market.
Yeah.
By audiences.
And one thing I have read you guys talking about is this idea of guerrilla hustling. And I feel like a lot of filmmakers, they think that their movie will be successful by virtue of its quality. If you make a good movie, people will naturally come find it. It'll naturally be successful, naturally sell. Clearly, as experienced producers, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that that is very far from the truth.
Well, I don't know if that's not true, but I think that perhaps their perspective of what good is might not be true.
Yeah, because I do stand by the fact that, again, I've seen it. I've seen good movies not get the attention they deserve. But it happens very rarely. Because most of the time, if you make, there is this myth that festivals are all politics. They're not all politics. There are politics involved, as there are politics involved in everything.
Yeah.
But as I said, whether it's TIFF or any of the other real festivals, they're watching. Somebody's watching the movie that you submit, right? Now, if they don't watch it with the right mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you get when you go through a source, like if what you get if you say if we're brokering your movie for you or another company is brokering your movie for you, is that we know people, so we can basically contextualize the movie. But ultimately, every year CAA, UTA, and WME have movies rejected from Sundance if they're submitted to they're on movies. Nobody's forced. It's very rare. Spike Lee maybe can force a movie into Sundance. Kevin Smith maybe can force a movie into Sundance. And even that's not forcing. That's just because if you have a Kevin Smith or a Spike Lee movie, it's more likely that you'll sell tickets, and it's more likely that the movie will have an audience that wants to see it, and more likely that people will respond to the movie just based on history. And so I have a hard time believing that a movie is ever forced into Sundance or South by or TIFF or Tribeca or whatever. Any of them certainly can. No programmer is taking money under the table at a legitimate festival, I would say, to program a movie. That's not how it works. And yes, if you premiere a great movie at a top tier festival like Sundance, the chances are your movie will find an audience and get bought. That said, I have a hard time understanding how you can make a great movie without some form of hustle, because every movie is a miracle, and good movie, that is. Some movies are abominations, and two, it's hard to imagine how you're going to get that movie out there without some sort of guerrilla hustle at some level, right? Because ultimately, it's not just about the movie coming out in the marketplace, but somebody also needs to aggressively let people know that the movie is out there. Because like we keep saying, when you have 10,000 things coming out every Tuesday and Friday, it becomes impossible to keep track unless something announces itself violently.
Yeah.
And the guerrilla hustle never really stops. You don't stop doing the guerrilla hustle once you get to a certain budget. We're still doing it, but we did it very physically on our first movie, Contracted, which was a $55,000 movie. JD and I were literally going to the 99-cent store and setting up the Crafty. Mm-hmm. So we were doing everything from raising the money to buying and setting up the Crafty. But yes, I would say that if what you meant by your question was also just advice for people putting together the movies from a guerrilla perspective is something that I'm constantly shocked that filmmakers who are just making their movies are not thinking about is what is the end goal, right? Who is your movie for? And that's not necessarily who's your audience, but what distributor do you see buying your movie? Where do you see the movie premiering? Okay, great. Obviously, everybody wants Sundance and TIFF and Cannes and whatever. But if you don't get into those, what's a second option or a third option? And then back to the distributor example, you look at those distributors, see what movies they're releasing. Be like, can my movie fit into this, this distributor's brand?
Right.
You really have to, not necessarily the director, but it's perhaps maybe your producer has to be thinking like that. You can't just be like, I'm going to make a movie, and I hope it's good and it gets to the Sundance and sells for millions of dollars. You have to be thinking a little bit more intelligently and broadly than that.
Yeah.
You also have to think about what your hook is. When we did Contracted, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We learned how to make a movie through making that movie, but we understood right away that Contracted was a movie with an angle. It was an STD zombie movie. That hadn't been done before at that time, and that was interesting. And then obviously we kept the budget really low, and it worked out. But just to be thinking about all these things ahead of time, as opposed to just the movie's going to be like a John Carpenter movie, and if it's really good, we'll all do well. You need more than that, especially in 2021. maybe in 10, 20 years ago, it was a little different.
Yeah.
It's also important to understand that like your taste, if you're a thinking person, your taste is going to change, right? So like we did, we've done movies where we thought we had something and then we later learned that we didn't. And those things ultimately help make you a better filmmaker if you pay attention to them. There are a lot of people who aren't, you can't. I remember one of the great things I learned from working for Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett, as briefly as I did. I mean, those guys, whether you like their movies or not, they kill themselves to make good movies. They like Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett. Simon has a great quote where he says, "I hate all filmmakers and all films, but most of all, I hate myself and my own films." And I'm like, that really is, you have the 70s because you have that situation where Francis Coppola screens The Conversation for, George Lucas and Peter Bogdanovich and Steven Spielberg, and they all rip on it.
Right.
Or whatever it was. Like, you need to have this experience where you need, if you look at everything you do and you see it as flawless, it's very hard to know how you're going to, become a better filmmaker and really get it to that level. Like, you need to really look and take stock of your movie and say, is this a Sundance movie? Is this a movie, for a wide audience? And why am I making the movie? Because, the idea of like, if you're making a movie for yourself, you have to make a movie that you'll love. Obviously, that's first and foremost. But to make a movie for yourself, I mean, making movies even making a low budget movie costs a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of time. And so you always want to make sure, unless you're self-financing, assuming that you're like most people and you're just raising the money to make a movie, you want to make sure you're going to give that return. You want to think about these things. And something that I see a lot that I really encourage filmmakers not to do. I mean, you can do this if you're like raising money from, vulnerable people in your hometown who won't do the real research. But right. If you're trying to raise sophisticated equity, even sophisticated private equity, which is already how sophisticated is that. But if you're trying to do that, never put like paranormal activity on your business plan, because that's literally, that's playing the lottery. Like paranormal activity happened twice. It happened with Blair Witch Project and it happened again with paranormal activity. But that is truly the exception that makes the rule. That it may happen again. It probably will happen again. But the odd, putting that on again, it's like starting a restaurant and saying you're going to make, again, and this is a terrible comp because it's perhaps disrespectful to the movie, but it's like opening a burger joint and saying this is going to be the next McDonald's. Right. It's not. That doesn't really happen. That's not a viable thing. But really, if you are putting together a business plan and you say like, okay, you're making a low budget, you're making a low budget alien invasion movie, and you have movies like The Vast of Night, or you find these movies that really do feel like comps, because they shouldn't just be comps in terms of success. They should be comps in terms of your approach, right? Yeah. Like, is this a repeatable business strategy? And that is something that, again, if you're putting together a business plan, really try to find movies that, putting the Don't Breathe on your business plan doesn't make any sense, because that was a movie that Sony had from the get-go. That was always going to be a theatrical release. So really say like, I'm approaching, try to learn as much as you can about the business aspect. And it's hard because people always lie, and like there's a lot of misinformation out there. But really just try to talk to as many filmmakers as you can. Most filmmakers are accessible, most, maybe, obviously like maybe Fede Alvarez isn't so accessible, but most, a lot of filmmakers who've had movies out from independent distributors, you can reach out to them on Facebook, you can reach out to them on Twitter. If you're respectful and you're polite, a lot of people will respond to you and give you advice. And that's also very, very helpful. One of the core ways I got into the business was just hitting up people on MySpace and Facebook. And, it'll be awkward sometimes, like anything. There will be people who will be put off by that. But a lot of people will just be like, again, assuming you're not asking them to read your script or asking them for money, if you're just asking them for advice, a lot of people are happy to give advice. Makes them feel smart. Yeah.
No, I think that's huge. And mentors have been very pivotal for both of you guys. Could you talk about your approach to getting mentors and what mentors have meant to you? And if there are any specific, pieces of advice or wisdom that you did get from your mentors, feel free to share those as well.
Without getting too down a rabbit hole, I read in a Fangoria magazine as a 13-year-old that Eli Roth checked his own MySpace messages. And so I'm giving my own the advice that I gave myself, which was, oh, that's my ticket into the business. I'm from Long Island. I don't know anybody in entertainment. Everybody thinks I'm crazy for wanting to go into the movies. Let me reach out to Eli Roth. So I MySpaced Eli, and he got back to me. And I was like, this is my ticket into the business. And I started doing that with other filmmakers. And I spent some time with different independent filmmakers, kind of just shadowing them in Los Angeles. And I'd go out for a summer and spend time with people. And some of the stuff that I learned were a lot of things of what not to do. Like, I think in the independent genre space, people make, you have to look at the entertainment. You have to look at this and say, is this a career or is this a passionate hobby?
Right.
And that really is what you have to think about. Again, and I'm not trying to, everybody, there's no human, again, because people don't need movies and movies are so expensive to make, you have to constantly be thinking like, is this something that you want to take seriously? And if you want to take it seriously, then you want to look at the broader picture of how it's a sustainable career. And a lot of people will go to Sitges or they'll go to Fright Fest or one of these festivals that are wonderful, that we love going to, that we dreamed of going to. And you'll have, 1,000 people cheering for your movie and asking for your autograph. But that doesn't necessarily translate into success, into financial viability. And that can be really devastating. And again, those highs stop coming if you stop making movies. And if you don't show returns, at a certain point, it becomes very difficult to keep making movies. And so, really think about like, it doesn't matter if people love your movie we've had movies at Sitges that have done that have been real crowd pleasers, and it's been great. And that doesn't always necessarily, and thankfully, I actually think all of those movies, for the most part, were financially successful for us.
Yeah.
But I can say a lot of the movies that play there, they don't even get deals. And so not just, I'm not using them as an arbitrary example.
Right.
A lot of movies that you see at Sundance won't get a lucrative, most movies at Sundance will lose money, right? Most movies at any festival will lose money. And so you want to be aware of that, because ultimately, A, it implies what the audience appetite for what you have is. And B, it also, you want to learn, like one of the things that I learned from people were just, you get very myopic and you get into these small worlds where you think that all that matters is this film festival or what this reviewer says or what this filmmaker said to you. And it also can be ultimately very painful because it becomes like high school where you take these things so personally and you can burn relationships over it. So, be level-headed, understand that most things that seem like issues in the moment aren't actually issues. If you get a bad review from somebody, that's not the end of the world. If a filmmaker, if an actor yells at you on set on a hard day, that's not the end of the world. And then, I'll say just, in terms of mentors that we've had guys like, I'll say, do a shout out to our dear friend, Roy Lee. Thank God we've been very fortunate that we have a great relationship with Roy Lee. And Roy, is somebody who doesn't get emotionally, he doesn't let his emotions take, Rafi and I can be very emotional guys. Roy is not someone who.
Now, granted, he's been doing this a lot longer than we have.
Yes.
Has made quite a lot of money. So it's just a little bit of a different position, but it's been fascinating to just watch because he is a mentor of ours, and we are doing quite a bit of business with him now too. And just to watch how he operates and just moves from project to project within the industry has just been so fascinating because he's just so calm, cool, collected about everything he does.
And it's incredible. And that's something where I heard Brad Fuller say years ago, in an interview where he said he wishes he could tell himself as when he was first starting out, if an agent yells at you, it doesn't matter. It ultimately doesn't matter,
Right.
And also just that it doesn't matter how big you get. People are going, I remember, Jason Blum has said, what's your hardest day? What's today? Monday? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Jason Blum spent years trying to get Upgrade made with Lee Winnell. That's the creator of two massive franchises and the biggest producer in horror, arguably, or one of the biggest producers in horror. And they struggle to get that movie made because it doesn't matter. The second you stop hustling, move to, retire. I mean, that's not, you need to constantly be doing your job, and you can never expect anyone to do your job for you.
Yeah, that's great.
The person to do it for. Then you run a company and you're paying them to do it. Then hopefully you can expect it.
So can you talk us through the founding of BoulderLight and the overall evolution of it? Like, at what point did you guys feel, okay, we're not just producers, we now have a company? At what point did you go from, or could you just overall just walk us through the founding of the company and the overall development and where you guys are at now?
Rafi, you want to?
Sure. Yeah. Well, JD and I, we started pretty young. I was 20, JD was 19, and we moved out to LA, and we were living at JD's aunt and uncle's house. And I literally went, we had met the filmmakers that did Contracted, and I went back to New York and raised $55,000, and we made that movie for 15 days in LA in 2012. And thankfully it came in on budget, and the movie turned out all right. And we sold it to IFC, and it did really well for them. and it was a huge sleeper hit on VOD and sold it to Netflix. And it was like reportedly like the most streamed movie on Netflix for days following its release. And the success of that movie allowed us the opportunity to keep making movies. And then the following year, we made a movie called Dementia, which was a New York Times Critics pick that we sold to IFC as well. We made Contracted Phase 2, which is obviously a sequel to Contracted that IFC had pre-bought in exchange for the North American license. And then that covered the budget and all of foreign was profit. At that same time, we didn't like the job that our sales agent was doing on the Contracted film. So we literally said, give us the rights back and we'll do this ourselves. And we booked a basement booth in the Palais in Cannes, printed out the posters, carried them on the plane because it was cheaper than shipping, and literally walked around the hallways of the Palais in Cannes for anybody who looked like an international buyer and said, give us 5 minutes of your time and you won't regret it. And through that, we legitimately cultivated these incredible relationships internationally. So for example, the Contracted films were released by Bravos Pictures in Hong Kong, and they had never done a horror movie. They did like The Revenant and Hacksaw Ridge, and they bought the movie and it opened up top 10 theatrically at the Hong Kong box office, which is obviously something we never imagined. We made this little tiny $50,000 movie. The success of those movies and other movies had led to certain co-financing deals we did out of a company in Hong Kong called Making Film, which was started by Pang Ho Chung, who's a really big director in China, and his wife and partner, Subi Liang, who is from Media Asia. We hit it off with them. They financed a slate of films with us. Then we did another co-production deal with a company called MM2 Entertainment, wearing the hat, which is the largest production and distribution company in Singapore. And they really bet on us. And we met with the CEO and we hit it off. And they co-financed a few of our movies and gave us money for our overhead to build out our office and to make a hire and really kind of just legitimize the company a little bit more in terms of the scope of what we can accomplish. And then so we've done 15 movies since 2012. It's been a process. I don't think we would have recognized ourselves 3 years ago, and we sure as hell wouldn't have recognized ourselves 9 years ago. So you're constantly changing and evolving to where you are today. But I would say, JD, what would you say? Like, when did we start feeling like we're truly running a company? The past two.
I would say Contracted 2 was the first iteration where we pre-sold the movie domestically with XYZ and we exceeded XY. We did the foreign rights for Contracted 2. And I remember a company that we respect that does foreign sales told us what they thought we would do, and we beat that projection, I believe. And I remember that felt really good. Like that paid for our first office, and that was. And at the same time, we did just to give Making Film the credit to Rafi, it was a fully financed deal. They fully financed the slate of movies for us, and that was really incredible. And that was probably the first time where I felt like, we're making exponentially more money than we were before. So to speak, and we have an office now, and
obviously the difference between not having an office and having an office, I know that sounds weird in the age of COVID, but we're big office guys. Is you can't compare it.
Yeah, and then the next time, like Rafi said, I think really a turning point was probably around the time Pledge premiered. We started we did the Vigil, we did Becky, and that again, we were finding our voice, we were finding our perspective. You learn what works for you, and really that's just something we've been very grateful for. Like the mistakes we've made, I think we've been very cognizant of.
And just to be clear, just for the listeners, like it took 6-7 years for us to get to the point where we feel much more comfortable. Like we know what we're doing, we know what we want, we know who our partners are, we know how the business works. We've always really known how the business works. Another thing we're always surprised by is like there's so many people, filmmakers, who like have no idea how the movie business actually works.
Right.
So thankfully, we've kind of like really had our footing there since the beginning of understanding the economics of film.
Yeah.
But I would say the past couple of years is really when we sort of jumped to the next level. I'd say the past 2 years in terms of just like getting who we need on the phone and making the movies that, again, we really love.
Yes, and that was the real turning point. Is it goes back to the basics. I'll say something. Jeffrey Greenstein is a friend of ours. He's the co-president of Millennium New Image, the company that makes like The Expendables and Rambo. And when we were starting to do foreign sales, he gave us great advice. He said, all of this stuff, this whole business, it's simple, but it's not easy. But it's simple. And that true words I are rarely said about the business. Like, again, the two things that we've learned are basic math. Basic math that we knew when we came out here is totally essential. It's as essential as you think it is. And two, do what you love. because that's ultimately what other people are going to love too. You know, the movies that we regret doing, the only movies that we regret doing, and there aren't that many of them that we've done, thankfully, like, because normally there were ancillary benefits, but the two movies that we regret doing probably, or two, the most, are the movies that we did for the wrong reasons. Like, we did them because of what we thought other people would want, not because we actually love them. And there were other movies, again, there were so many movies between our initial films and where we are now that we didn't fully believe in, that we did again because we thought, oh, well, this will get into X Festival, or this will be, this is what the kids want. And that's not, you need to really think, like, do I love this? Would I pay to see this in a theater?
Right.
And why is somebody waiting in line, or even if they're going to watch it, why is somebody choosing to watch this over rewatching, one of their favorite movies on Netflix, or just, or so on? Like, what is the angle? And that is something that I think we really learned. And it sounds, that's why we came out here. Like, you have to reteach yourself. Why do I love movies? Why is this exciting to me? Why do these get me high? Constantly try to, the reason Steven Spielberg is the biggest director of all time, whether you like him or not, we happen to, but we happen to be big Spielberg fans. But whether or not, Jaws is your thing, Spielberg never lost that when you look at when you watch a Spielberg movie, you feel that love. Whether it's Steven Spielberg or Quentin Tarantino or Sam Raimi, in their best movies, they're kids. There's this childlike innocence, even in their darkest moments, that is enthralling and captivating and magical. And if you want to make great stuff, and if you want to make stuff that will make money, you can't lose that, because that is the ultimate asset.
Yeah, I feel like that's enormous. So how do people get on your radar? Not should they email you or send you a MySpace message, but what do you observe in creators that make you want to pursue a project or reach out to them?
Well, Rafi's home phone number is 513. No, it's generally people can hit us up through we have representation, so they can hit us up through our representation. They can email our website. We don't personally necessarily always check that, but it does get checked. And if a message, the message will get forwarded to me. They can hit us up on. I'm still on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Like, the BoulderLight is on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter. Again, we don't generally. We're not always looking at unsolicited material, but if something has
tell us why. There's something that pisses me off so much is when I get a cold submission, and it's as if they've never even researched our website. They're pitching us a movie that we would never make. So it's like, if you're going to come at us with a cold submission, tell us why we should be reading it or looking at it.
That said, like, we'll totally, I've never understood the idea of not being respectful of somebody who puts themselves out there to try to do some great stuff, because, like, ultimately, Fred Savage told me something years ago, and I know I name dropped it. I'm name dropping now, but I want to give him credit. He gave me great advice. He said, like, most of the time when you reach out to somebody, if you're not asking for money, if you're just asking for, like, advice or guidance or whatever, everybody had to get it paid for. Everybody has, got it from somebody and wants to, and is happy to pay it forward. And granted, if you have a great pitch, if you have a great idea for a movie, or more appropriately, if you have a great script or a great movie, you don't need us. Like, I'm happy to, you're doing me the favor if you bring me a great piece of material. Everybody wants that, But always, what I will say is, if you're going to reach out to us or any company, always think, is this the best that I can do? Is this my best? I remember Mick Garris saying years ago in an interview, not to plug another podcast, but this wasn't from when he did the podcast. This was like when he was just a filmmaker.
No, I love Mick's podcast. My goal is to give people something to listen to in between episodes of Postmortem.
So Mick said, like, that his first script that he sold was his 12th script, And I knew a writer, extremely successful screenwriter, who sold his 50-something script. I mean, you can't, just because you wrote something doesn't mean you should share it with somebody. Really before you send a script of yours to a professional, to a working professional, you read it and you give it to people who've read scripts to read. you know, because you want to make sure that what you're sending is not embarrassing. And again, a lot of times you'll look at something that you wrote 5 years ago and you'll be like, I can't believe I wrote this.
Right.
Understand that that's going to happen no matter how good it is. So make sure that it's not embarrassing before you send it to somebody, because generally you get one shot to make, always you get one shot to make a first impression. So just make sure that you're putting your best foot forward.
Yeah. It also is, I will add, even if your stuff is good, it's always going to be an endurance test. Mm-hmm. It's an endurance. It's a business of rejection. That's just how the business works. You're constantly making offers, trying to get into festivals, trying to get movies financed. You're constantly relying on other people to say yes, no matter who you are in this business. And most of the time people say no, just because that's how life works. So it really also is an endurance test of just moving on after every rejection and not letting it get you down.
That's great. Well, guys, this was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. Any parting wisdom or advice for those aspiring producers and filmmakers out there?
That was mine.
That was yours. That was a great one.
Advice: just stay hungry, stay excited. Love this stuff. Don't take things personally. Don't and understand that, like, again, when we were, like Rafi said, when we were starting foreign sales, and we would joke about all the awful things people said to us as we were trying to pull buyers and stuff. You can't. Don't be afraid of a little coffee in the face. But metaphorically and I guess literally. Don't. That doesn't ultimately matter. Like, none of that stuff. Just stay positive and make sure that you're constantly reevaluating who you are and what you're doing. And generally you'll inevitably get better if you do that.
Awesome. Thank you both again. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Nick.
All right. Here, as always, are some key takeaways from this conversation with JD and Raphael. Number 1, urgency is imperative. You know that feeling when you hear about a project or see a trailer or read an announcement for a movie and you cannot fucking wait to see it? You ever find yourself actually wishing that they announced the project closer to the release date because of the pain you're going to have to go through having to wait for it? Those are the kinds of projects you need to make. Nowadays, with the ubiquity of streaming, audiences have an infinite cinema library at their fingertips. They need to not only be aware of your project, but they have to be extremely excited about it and dying for it to be released. As JD and Rafi mentioned, the way to do this is to create things that people haven't seen before, a compelling hook, a completely different take on a reliable trope, anything that hooks the audience. If your movie feels cliche and part of a sea of sameness and has nothing really that unique about it, you may get a decent review or the attention of a few odd audience members who stumble upon it while looking for something to watch on Saturday night, which is fine. But the real name of the game is for your project to be so compelling and so excited that people are counting down the days for its release. A natural extension of this rule is present in the next point. Number 2, if you're not in love with it, it probably won't work. It's a cliche at this point, but to make movies, you really have to love it. Making films is extremely difficult in every single stage, and one of the only ways to get through the difficulties associated with filmmaking is to absolutely love it. This is also necessary because the audience will always be able to sense your passion in the film itself. You can feel the excitement and sheer glee of filmmaking with directors like Spielberg, Tarantino, and P.T. Anderson. That's because these guys are in love with their movies, and this passion is completely infectious to audience members. If you're taking on a project as a career stepping stone or a way to make a quick buck, in all likelihood, the energy of the movie is going to be flat, and so will its ratings. Plus, to get your movie greenlit to begin with, producers need to see your enthusiasm for the project in order to invest in you. They know that the going will eventually get tough on set, and you need to have the kind of heart for the project that will enable you to push through the difficult times. There are plenty of exceptions to this rule, but as Quentin Tarantino says, if you really, really love movies with all of your heart, then you can't help but make a great movie. Your passion has to be alive and present in every frame of your movie. And if you do this right, audiences will be passionate about your movies too. Number 3, ask for advice, not favors. This is a big lesson that JD learned early on when he reached out to Eli Roth on MySpace and got an answer back the same day. JD asked Eli for advice, and as a result, Eli became his mentor and tremendously helped guide him through the ups and downs of Hollywood and filmmaking. Having someone like this in your life is priceless. Everybody needs a Yoda, so think about how you find yours. The best way to do this is to ask people for advice, not favors. Go and get yourself an IMDb Pro account for $20 a month and send an email asking for a very specific piece of advice from someone you trust and admire, but make sure the piece of advice won't take more than 10 minutes to respond to. Also make sure it's something unique and not something that they have addressed in any previous interview. What you do not want to do is ask them to read your screenplay, listen to your pitch, or make an introduction to someone who can help get your movie made. Any mentor worth their salt gets bombarded with pitches and requests for favors all day long. If you do this, it's kryptonite and you are just like everybody else. Instead, ask for a short but sweet piece of specific advice and then take their advice and let them know what happens and begin a correspondence. Number 4, nothing matters in this business. Move on. As we've discussed extensively, Hollywood is a very tough place with a lot of tough people. Everyone struggles, gets yelled at, gets rejected, gets insulted, lied to, or treated unjustly sooner or later. JD talked about getting aggressively yelled at all the time by studio executives and just shrugging it off and pushing forward because none of it really matters. As he said, don't be afraid to get a little coffee thrown in your face. And he's absolutely right. Hollywood is a walled garden and frankly a self-filtering ecosystem. So there's going to be an equal amount of people who will test your mettle and also people who are downright rude assholes. Who cares? Take the blows and move on. Don't let it discourage you, deject you, or slow you down in any way. Real abuse, of course, should not be tolerated. But get used to being knocked around a lot so you can develop a thick skin, because without it, you won't make it for 2 minutes in this town. Anyway, guys, thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with your friends and family on social media? Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor and on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to The Nick Taylor Horror Show.